Hello everyone, Mayor Dave Brummel, City of Warrenville, here again with another Minute with the Mayor. At our June 1st, 2020 council meeting, we finally were able to vote on the purchase of the former Citgo property. I'm sure you're familiar with that property. As you come down the hill on Batavia Road, it's on your right next to Votels. It has been abandoned essentially for the last 4 years. The city has been in negotiations with the ownership of that property for those 4 years to make that purchase. We have finally successfully concluded those negotiations, and the property will become part of the city's land holdings at that corner, along with the other 2 lots that the city has bought in the past. The purpose, of course, of that purchase is redevelopment, and we had a presentation at this council meeting on June 1st. I'd like to go through some of the highlights with you to give you an idea of where we're coming through, what our objectives are, and what all of this means to Warrenville. So, you probably noted as you pass this building many times that it is very dilapidated. One of the big questions that I've gotten over the last 4 years is, when is the city going to do something about that mess? It has been high on my list of priorities because it is at a gateway to our town, and when people come down that hill, they expect to see a quaint little city. Instead, they see an abandoned, dilapidated building and gas station. That's one of the problems with that building. Over the 4 years that it was for sale, there was absolutely zero interest from the private enterprise people to buy it and rehab it, and there are a number of reasons for that. The contamination is one of them. We have contamination from underground storage tanks. We have heavy metal contamination, and we have other contamination on that property, which makes it a very difficult property to redevelop because of the amount of money that it's going to take to rehab that property and bring it up to a standard that will allow us to use it in a meaningful way. There are regulations that have to be met also in terms of the building being rehabbed that's there. It's basically unusable as is and would require a significant investment for someone to change it into a building that could be used for something. So there are a number of reasons that it's been difficult to get to the point where we're at, but the reasons that we're there are listed here. One is the building continues to deteriorate inside and out. We have the underground storage tanks that are required to be removed in 3 years. They will stay there if we do nothing. There's that subsurface petroleum contamination and the heavy metal contamination that I mentioned on the property. Absolutely no interest in redevelopment from the private sector. Basically, if we don't do something as a community, that will probably look that way for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Maybe forever, because of the difficulties in redeveloping it. There's a certain amount of money obviously involved in that. This is, of course, what communities do. They take problem sites, and because this will not be redeveloped as a private enterprise operation, the city needs to get involved to make that clean up and to make this an attractive property for redevelopment. And that, of course, is our objective. If we get involved, well, we're going to get those tanks removed. Phillips 66, one of the former owners of the property, is on the hook for a large part of the cost of that. So we're working with them to get that taken care of. The structures will come down in the next couple of years. The contamination will be cleaned up to a residential standard. That's very important because it could be cleaned up to a lesser standard. The problem with that is that you can't use the property for anything except that which keeps the ground covered with concrete or asphalt. You have to encapsulate the contamination, and you can use the surface of the property, but you can't do anything else with it. So if we didn't clean it to a residential standard, it would absolutely limit how it could be redeveloped in a positive way for the community going forward. Hopefully, 3 to 4 years from now, we'll be in a position to look at private redevelopment, and I want to emphasize that the city will have a very open, transparent process for this, and will invite all the stakeholders involved and members of the community to help us decide the future of that property. There are a number of opportunities, I guess, that we'd like to look at. Part of the problem with the property is that about 60% of the 3 lots that we will own is floodplain, which means it can't be developed into a commercial or residential property. But that leaves 40%, which is along the roads, which is very developable, and at least that 60% to put into an open space project with perhaps a path along the river and some passive recreation opportunities for the community. So the entire piece of property will be usable. We're anticipating 2 separate uses. The cost, of course, is going to be substantial for this. Again, I would emphasize that this is what communities do. This is our job, to determine how we spend the tax money in a careful manner that benefits the community long term. From the perspective of staff and from a majority of the elected officials, this is an expenditure that will pay back the community in many ways on many levels. The project cost, about $1.25 million is the estimate, and somewhere in there between $468,000 and $888,000 would be how much the community would have to invest. That depends entirely, of course, on the outside sources of funding that we are able to put together. We are always very aggressive with that, and we're very hopeful that we can find a large part of this money from outside sources. There's some indication there of the funding sources that are available to us. Again, we're quite hopeful that we'll be able to access a lot of funding to make this happen. If you take a look at the map there, you can see the floodplain is defined by the partially green part. So you could tell where the park would be, you could tell where the redevelopment would be. There are still, of course, a lot of hurdles to be passed in order to make this happen, but we've taken the first step. And again, this was something that we heard a lot from the community, that this was a need to clean this mess up and going forward to have something we could be proud of there instead of an abandoned gas station. A few things that I've seen on social media recently as the word got out that we purchased the property, I'd like to address. One, there is no secret plan to redevelop this property that we haven't shared with the community. We do everything in public, obviously, and while staff and elected officials have discussions about potential uses, there certainly is no plan that we're just waiting to spring on the community. And certainly no plans for a roundabout. 3 or 4 years ago, that was a big issue. It was settled. The council determined not to do a roundabout at that place. There has been no discussion over the past 3 or 4 years about bringing that idea back to life. So I'd like to reassure you that a roundabout is not one of the things that we're discussing. Can I promise that in the future that might not come up again? No, because we generally try to discuss all the options to make a good decision. But again, it is not something that has been planned. It's not something that we have been actively discussing. I saw someone say that they had a plan that would have redeveloped this property and cleaned it up at no cost to the city. I would like to see that, because there's no possible way from my perspective that this could have been done without the city getting involved. Again, the amount of private investment that would have had to been made to make this property redevelopable was uncertain, but a huge number. The cleanup would have had to been done, the building demolition, and then build a new building. The numbers just don't work. There was too big a gap between the investment, the private investment necessary, and the final cost. So the only way that this property would ever change from my perspective would be that we did what we just did, which is purchase the property. Early on, there was a suggestion by the county that a berm be built behind Votels. That was eventually discounted by virtually everyone that looked at it as an impractical solution. For one thing, we would have lost a significant part of Leon Park, which would have had to have been taken away for floodplain. The Votels, the business closest to that, would have lost a significant amount of their storage property in the back, and the contamination would not have been addressed. So that was not a plan, an alternative that we thought was a good one, so that was discounted early on. And then finally, I would just like to emphasize that when we do get to the planning stage for figuring out what to do with that property, the public will be absolutely invited to participate in that process. Your input will be weighed heavily, and hopefully we'll come up with something that we can all agree is something that we want people to see as they come down the hill that says, yeah, this is Warrenville. So that's what we're working towards. Stay in touch, and please continue. The virus is still out there. Continue your social distancing and mask wearing. I want all of you to be safe. So thank you for your time.